Hi everybody. Today what we're going to talk about is converging cultures. As we start our U.S. history to 1865, we're going to look at the Native Americans who are descended from Asians who probably began migrating to North America approximately 15,000 to 30,000 years ago. So in this lecture, our objectives are to explain why scientists believe that the earliest Americans migrated from Asia, and to describe the civilizations of Mesoamerica and the early cultures of North America. I'd like to start by talking about an incident that happened around in the 1920s. So how do scientists know who the first Americans were and when and how they came to America? So the person pictured here is George McJunkin. He was an African-American cowboy in the 1920s. He was riding along a gully near the town of Folsom, New Mexico, when he noticed something gleaming in the dirt. He began digging and found a bone and a flint and an arrowhead. J.D. Figgins of the Colorado Museum of Natural History determined that the bone was from some type of bison that had been extinct for more than 10,000 years. The arrowhead's proximity to the bone implied that human beings had been in America at least 10,000 years, which no one had believed at that time. So it was significant that this artifact was found because it meant that humans had actually been in the United States well before it became the United States. And no one had thought that before. So let's talk about how the first humans came to the Americas. Scientists are unsure of when the first people came to America, but speculation points to about 15 to 30,000 years ago. How long ago the first Americans appeared remains a debated question. Scientists are able to state much more confidently, however, who these earliest people were and how they arrived in America and what their lives were like. So how do scientists learn the origins of ancient peoples? Well, they study the skulls, bones, teeth, and DNA of ancient peoples to learn their origins. DNA and other evidence indicate that the earliest Americans probably came from Asia. How do scientists determine how old objects are? Scientists use radiocarbon dating to determine how old an object is. So this method measures the radioactivity left in carbon-14. All living things absorb carbon. Scientists use the rate at which the carbon-14 loses its radioactivity to calculate the age of objects. Studies of the Earth's history also offer clues. About 100,000 years ago, the Earth began to cool, gradually causing much of the Earth's water to freeze into huge ice sheets called glaciers. So this period is called the Ice Age. Ocean levels dropped, exposing the area of dry land between Asia and Alaska called Beringia. Scientists believe that 15,000 years ago, people from Asia began trekking eastward across this new land bridge, eastward being right about here. As they crossed this land bridge, they hunted large animals. These people were probably nomads, people who continually moved from place to place. So what did they hunt? Woolly mammoth, mastodon, large game. About 15,000 years ago, bands of fur-clad hunter-gatherers trekked across the land bridge, following herds of woolly mammoths and other big game animals. They slowly spread east and then south into the Great Plains and southwest of the U.S. Their descendants had settled most of the hemisphere from the Arctic Circle to the tip of South America. Archaeologists archaeologists have found artifacts that suggest people were in America even before the land corridor had opened. One theory proposes that people crossed from Northeast Asia in skin-covered boats, the shore, and hunting for their food, which is indicated here with the red arrows. Pacific crossing theory down here suggests that migrants went south to Australia and across the Pacific Ocean, hopping from island to island until they reached South America. A third theory indicates the Atlantic crossing theory, suggesting that America's earliest inhabitants went from southwestern Europe, southern Spain, and France, hugging the edge of the glaciers, North Atlantic, and they may have sailed from Iceland and Greenland down to North America. There was a skull that was found in Brazil that also prompted some to consider the possibility of an early migration from Africa. So as time passed on, Americans learned how to plant and raise crops. During this agricultural revolution, between 9,000 and 10,000 years ago, Native Americans began to settle in Mesoamerica. Meso is from the Greek word for middle, so it's in this area right here. So what did they grow? Well, a variety of foods, from pumpkins, peppers, squash, gourds, and beans. The most important and popular crop was maize, which was a large seeded grass known today as corn. So why is this important? Well, corn was ground into flour to make bread and could be stored for long periods of time. Agriculture allowed people to stay in permanent villages to raise crops and store their harvest. What other changes were there? Well, new technologies, including tools for cutting and digging and grinding, and the invention of pottery to store crops and construct shelters. Civilizations emerged. If we look at a civilization, we can define it as a highly organized society that is characterized by trade, government, the arts, science, and often a written language. Here are some pictures of what some of the earliest Americans may have looked like and the different big game that they hunted. Understand that this is well before photography, so the only recollection we have of prehistory and early history is an artist's rendering of what this may have looked like. So anthropologists believe that the Olmec culture was the earliest or the first civilization in America. The culture began between 1500 and 1200 BC in present-day Veracruz, Mexico. The Olmec had large villas and temples and pyramids, and they built large sculpted monuments. The Olmec influenced another people to build Teotihuacan, the first large city in America. They set up a trade network in which they traded obsidian, a volcanic glass found in large deposits near the city. They sculpted imposing monuments, including 8-foot-high heads weighing up to 20 tons. Olmec ideas spread throughout Mesoamerica, influencing other people. They lasted until 300 BC to 600 AD. The Mayan civilization developed in the Yucatan Peninsula in Central America and southern Mexico. The Maya developed complex calendars based on the position of the stars. The Maya had a talent for engineering and mathematics. They built elaborate temples and were elaborate priests and held ceremonies dedicated to the Mayan gods. The Mayan people were fragmented, not unified, and often went to war. Their cities were abandoned for unknown reasons and lasted until about 900 AD. The Toltec people were master architects. They built large pyramids and huge palaces. They were among the first to use gold and copper for art and jewelry. They were invaded by the Chichimec about 1200 AD. One group of the Chichimec, called Mexica, established the city of Tenochtitlan in 1325 on this site of what is known as today as Mexico City. The Mexica took the name Aztec for themselves from the name of their original homeland. They built a great empire conquering other cities. Their military controlled trade in the region and demanded tribute from cities they conquered. When the Europeans arrived in 1500, an estimated 5 million people were living under Aztec rule. Anthropologists believe that the agricultural technology of Mesoamerica spread into the American Southwest and up the Mississippi River. The Hohokam built a civilization in what is now central Arizona from about 300 AD to the 1300s. They created elaborate systems of irrigation canals. They grew many crops, made pottery, pendants, and etchings, and by the 1300s they began to abandon their irrigation systems, most likely due to floods. Increased competition for farmland probably led to wars and immigration. By 1500, the Hohokam had vanished from history. The Anasazi built civilizations between 700 and 900 AD in the area which is present-day states of Utah, Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico meet. They built networks of basins and ditches to catch rainwater for their crops. Between 850 and 1100 AD, the Anasazi, living in Chaco Canyon in northwest New Mexico, built large multi-storied buildings of adobe and cut stone. These buildings, called pueblos, which is a Spanish word for villages, had connecting passageways and circular ceremonial rooms called kivas. The Anasazi built cliff dwellings at Mesa Verde in what is known as, today, southwestern Colorado. The Mississippian culture and mound builders of today stem from an agricultural technology that improved strains of maize and beans that spread north from Mexico to the American Southwest and up the Mississippi River. Between 700 AD and 900 AD, the Mississippian culture arose in the Mississippi River Valley. The rich soil of the flood plains were good for growing maize and beans. The Mississippians were great builders. One of their largest cities was Cahokia, built in Illinois near present-day St. Louis, Missouri. It had over 100 flat-top pyramids. The Mississippian culture spread along the Missouri, Ohio, Red, and Arkansas rivers. The Native American cultures. The Europeans started arriving in the Americas around 1400. Up until about 1500, people of the Great Plains practiced agriculture. They were influenced by the Hopewell and Mississippian cultures. These people lived near the Missouri and other rivers. They planted corn and used wood to build their homes. Around 1500, the peoples of the Western Plains abandoned their villages and became nomads, possibly because of war or drought. Those in the East, including the Pawnee, Kansas, Iowa peoples, continued to hunt and farm. Peoples of the Western Plains, such as the Sioux, followed migrating buffalo herds on foot and lived in cone-shaped tents called teepees. The life for the Sioux, or Little Snake, as the word means, and other groups on the Great Plains changed dramatically after they began taming horses. The Spanish had brought horses to the Americas in the 1500s. The animals spread north and eventually reaching the Great Plains. The Sioux became some of the world's greatest mounted hunters and warriors. Sioux men achieved fame in the community through bravery in both hunting and war. Sioux warriors would take the scalps of enemies they'd killed, but to gain even greater glory, they would perform a dangerous but non-violent act of counting coup. A warrior would charge into a group of the enemy and simply touch one of them with a stick, a means of humiliation, and then gallop away. Native Americans of what is today the United States had diverse social structures and religions. The cultural differences between Native American groups can be explained by studying the geography where each group lived. A culture is an area is a region where people share a similar way of life. Each culture area was home to many different tribes. A tribe is a community of people who share common customs, language, and rituals. Members of a tribe saw themselves as distinct people who share common origin. In different culture areas, people met their basic needs for food, clothing, and shelter in different ways, through hunting, gathering, fishing, farming, and trade. By the 1500s, Native Americans had created a wide array of cultures and languages. They had also developed economies and lifestyles well suited to the geography and climate in their particular corners of North America. The shared beliefs of many Native American groups included a respect for the earth and the forces of nature. Prayers and ceremonies were designed to keep a balance between the people and forces of nature. Native Americans believed that people must adapt to their ways of the natural world. The world was full of powerful unseen forces and spirits which Native Americans honored, so they held special ceremonies. In the farming areas, tribes held special ceremonies to ensure good rainfall. At Pueblo festivals, dancers were dressed to represent kachinas, or spirits with the power to bring good harvests. In the southeast, when the corn ripened in the fall, the green corn ceremony marked the end of the old year and the beginning of the new one. The culture of most Native Americans developed in response to their environment. The West had many small groups that adapted to the variations of the region's climate and geography. The Southwest were descendants of the Anasazi and Hohokam. Groups included the Pueblo people such as the Zuni and the Hopi. These people depended on corn to survive. Farmers cultivated several species of corn whose seeds can withstand dry soil. In these groups, when a man married a woman, he joined the household of the bride's mother. Within the family, men and women worked separately. Men farmed and herded sheep, performed ceremonies, made moccasins, and wove clothing and blankets. Women took care of the house, made pottery and baskets, hauled water. The women helped the men farm and construct the houses. When boys turned 6, they joined the kachina. A kachina is a good spirit. The Pueblo people believed kachinas visited their town each year with messages from the gods. Members of the kachina cult would wear masks symbolizing the spirits and would dance to bring the spirits to town. Sometime around 1500, two other peoples, the Apache and the Navajo, came to this region from the far northwest of North America. The Apache were nomadic farmers and generally remained that way, but the Navajo learned farming from the Pueblo people and lived in settlements. Next up, the Pacific Northwest. Bordering the Pacific Ocean from what is now southeastern Alaska to Washington State, these groups include the Tlingit, Hadia, Nootkas, Chinook, and Salish peoples. They did not practice agriculture, but still lived in permanent settlements. They used the heavily forested areas to build homes, canoes, create elaborate works of art, ceremonial masks, and totem poles. How were they able to live in one place without farming? They used the region's coastal waters and many rivers filled with fish, particularly salmon. Further inland, between the Rocky Mountains and the Cascade Range, other groups, the Nez, Persay, and Yakima, fished, hunted deer, and gathered roots and berries. Territory between the Sierra Nevada and Rocky Mountains their climate was much drier. Part of the Nez Persay groups, the Ute Shoshone, lived a nomadic life, and because the land was too arid for farming. West of the Ute lands, in what is known as today California, several groups enjoyed abundant wildlife and mild climate. In the far north, two different Native American groups made the far north their home. The most northern widespread were the Inuit, whose territory stretched across the Arctic from Alaska to Greenland. The Aleut settled in Alaska's Aleutian Islands. The Inuit and Aleut depended heavily upon hunting seals, walruses, whales, polar bears, caribou, musk oxen, and smaller game. Over time, they developed a wide variety of devices to cope with the harsh environment, such as the harpoon, kayak, dog sled, boots with ivory spikes for walking on the ice, special goggles to prevent night blindness. They were the only Native American group to develop lamps. They used whale oil and blubber for fuel. They lived in groups from single families to a few hundred people. Next up, the Eastern Woodlands. East of the Mississippi River and south of the Great Lakes, heavily wooded, almost 1 million square miles of woodland, many plants and animal life are enjoyed by the eastern Mississippi. These peoples provided for themselves by combining hunting, fishing, and farming. Deer were plentiful. They ate deer, corn, beans, and squash. Deer hide was used for clothing. Most of these people were divided into two major language groups, the Algonquin and Iroquois. The Algonquin peoples in the New England area today, the groups included the Wampanoag in Massachusetts, the Narragansett in Rhode Island, and the Pequot in Connecticut. Further south in what is today Virginia lived the Algonquin peoples of the Powhatan Confederacy. These Native Americans were the first to encounter the English settlers. The other Algonquin groups included the Delaware near the Delaware River, the Shoshone who lived in the Ohio River Valley. Words from the Algonquin language used in English today are words such as succotash, hominy, moccasin, and papoose. Stretching from west from the Hudson River across what is today New York and southern Ontario, and north to Georgian Bay were the Iroquois-speaking peoples. They included the Huron, Neutral, Erie, Seneca, Cayuga, Onondaga, Oneida, and Mohawk. These people, as did the Algonquins, practiced slash-and-burn agriculture. What is slash and burn? By cutting down parts of forest and then burning the cleared land, they were left with nitrogen-rich ashes, which they worked into the soil, making it more fertile. They also used several types of houses. Many villages enclosed by wooden stockades had larger rectangular longhouses with barrel-shaped roofs covered in bark. Others built wigwams. These were either cone-shaped or dome-shaped. They were made using bent poles and covered with hides or bark. The Algonquin and Iroquois people shared traits. Both made beads of white and purple shells that they arranged on strings and wove into belts called wampums. The designs on a wampum recorded important events and agreements. Both groups also viewed the land as a resource for a group of people to use, not for one person to buy or sell. All Iroquois people had similar cultures. They lived in longhouses in large towns protected by stockades. People lived in kinship groups or extended families headed by an elder woman of each clan. Iroquois women occupied positions of power and importance in communities. They were responsible for the planting and harvesting of crops. Up to 10 related families lived together in each longhouse. Despite their similar cultures, war often erupted among Iroquois groups. In the late 1500s, 5 of the nations in the western New York area formed an alliance to maintain peace. They feared war between themselves would tear them apart. When a bigger threat, the Huron group, threatened them all, the Iroquois League or Iroquois Confederacy consisted of the Seneca, Cayuga, Onondaga, Oneida, and Mohawk. Denikanwa, which is a shaman or tribal leader, and Hiawatha, a chief of the Mohawk, founded a league. The 5 nations agreed to building the Great Binding Law, a constitution that defined how the Confederacy would work. 50 chiefs, all men, the women who headed the kinship group selected them. Council members were appointed for life, but women could get rid of an appointee if they disagreed with his actions. The Eastern Woodlands peoples of the Southeast. Almost all of these peoples lived in towns. Women did most of the farming while men hunted deer, bear, wild fowl, and even alligator. Mississippian culture influenced many of the people in the Southeast. The town buildings were arranged around a central plaza. Houses were built out of poles and covered with grass, mud, or thatch. The Cherokee were the largest group in the Southeast. They lived in what is today North Carolina and eastern Tennessee. Other groups included the Choctaw, Chickasaw, Natchez, and the Creek. The Creek were a large group living in what is today Georgia and Alabama. They lived in about 50 villages that were divided into 50 war towns, where the war leaders lived and men trained for war, and peace towns where the political leaders lived. The 2 largest Native American tribes in Georgia were the Creek and the Cherokee. The Creek had 14 tribes such as the Yamacraw, Yamasee, Ocmulgee, Oconee, Chihuahua, and the Apalachicola, made up for the Creek Confederacy. The true name for the Creek was Muskogee, known for being brave and carrying on ways of their fathers. Europeans found the Muskogee living along the banks of what is today the Ocmulgee. European explorers didn't know the name of the tribe, so they called them Creek. Their language was Muskogean. This concludes the lecture on the early cultures of the United States.